I'm recording my end.
Good. Well, we should be live now.
Well, how are you getting on, live people? Turn the old phone off as well, because that'll be interrupting and annoying me. Nice one. Okay, so we are going to be talking about Eachtach and the story that you put up, episode 35. Isn't it? Yes. Now, we were chatting there a while ago, and I guess while people are kind of joining, we can have a little bit of a prelude to the story chat, because you were describing how our brains work in a little bit of a different way, and I think it's a complementary way. I think that's how we... But I actually think this is interesting, and this is why we work together so well, and how we create stories so well together. Now explain how your brain works.
I have a slightly strange brain because while I'm mostly a divergent thinker, I also have a very strong bias in favour of like gathering in and synthesizing and kind of summarising information, which I think is something that I do a lot of as a storyteller. Like whenever we're like, oh, here's a huge big thing that needs to be summarised, Sarah, you do that. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, that's your part. That's definitely
it's
your
like
part. Yeah.
Automatically my part. And yeah, we were talking about it because it's the kind of thing that in conversation, and especially in conversation when we're actually like trying to have a back and forth on a post-show chat, it's actually a little bit difficult to break into, because I also have a great way of sounding very authoritative about stuff that I'm not necessarily an authority on. So I will give my opinion to you as if it is absolutely indisputable fact. And
Definite.
You know, that can be a little bit difficult to
Can get you in trouble.
engage with.
Not gonna lie. Sure.
Whereas I think it also can be, I think you're more, I'm not sure how to describe it. You're definitely more.
Oh, don't try and describe my brain. Yeah, don't try and describe my brain. Well, I think that they're like what I automatically do is I look at the whole picture straight away. I don't go into. I can kind of look at the overlying kind of arc of a story that bit easier. So I don't know if that's divergent or not. I don't think it really is, because I don't think I accumulate the information as you do and then boil it down to its roots and its core as well as you do. In fact, that's one of the best things that you do. You find the truth in something straight away, or the reason or the backing or the reason why the character did something. Whereas I'll be like, okay, in a second, but what happens in the whole story? Like, where's the arc? Where's the ebb and the flow? And what are all the bigger pieces opposed to the specific truth in it? I don't know what that means. My brain does though.
I'm not sure either. I was kind of like, I'm on pretty solid ground when I'm describing my own brain, but if I'm talking about somebody else, it's kind of tricky. I just got a comment there from Pearl saying Aaron is quieter. He is. I've turned him up as loud as he'll go, but Aaron's just going to be...
Get in?
Yeah, if you...
Is there a way of doing it on my end?
Yeah, I think if you can get in slightly closer, and as long as you're not kind of spiking anything in terms of your
sure. These will be going up on our podcast pages as well. So this is a live chat, yes, but we will be releasing it as a live recorded podcast as well. So don't you worry, you can listen, and it'll be nicely streamlined by Oisin and Sam.
When that is done, Aaron is recording his own audio and I'm recording my audio, so we'll be able to even them out. But yeah, no, unfortunately, just streaming being streaming, there's going to be a little bit. It's going to be a little bit.
There's a little bit of a thing.
A little bit of a thing. Hopefully, only a little bit of a thing.
I wanted to open up the thing to have a look at. Anyway, so yes, I'm glad that people are joining. That's all lovely. I'm also glad to be talking to you, Sorka, about today's story, episode 35 of the Candlelit Tales podcast, which is a story we recorded in February in the Sugar Club, which is gas crack altogether, and it was for Women and Warriors, and the story we released was Eachtach, and we'll get to picking apart Eachtach in a little bit, I think. What I want to ask you, kind of on a broad thing to start the ball rolling, and to hear from other people as well, is why, as human beings, human doings, human everythings, why do we tell stories?
The big question.
Big question, right?
There's an interesting theory about this, that this is actually how human beings process information. That we actually think in story. It's kind of the natural ecosystem for our minds. And so the reason that like every major world religion is based around stories is exactly that. That's how we think. That's how we synthesize and process information, is by putting it into a story. And like you'll hear this from different fields. Like if you think about the therapeutic field, I remember a great quote from, I can't remember. I remember quotes, but I don't remember where I read them. Somebody very clever once said that people either, until people can articulate their stories, they act them out. And that's why people get into like bad patterns of behaviour, or like self-destructive patterns of behaviour, because they're enacting a trauma that they can't articulate. So actually storytelling is really, really important for human beings. We need to be able to tell our own stories, or else our stories tell us, kind of, in a way. And that's why people kind of reenact traumatic patterns. And so, yeah, like stories are, I think it almost becomes difficult for me to describe a story, because story encompasses so many things. Because it encompasses our sense of self, and it encompasses our worldview, and it encompasses our faith traditions. And it also encompasses like media.
Yeah, like once you start looking at what a story is, everything's a story essentially. It's like, oh, great, writing your shopping list essentially is a story. You're telling yourself how that you will be going to the shop. It's a future. Imagine the situation that you're putting yourself in, and you're looking around the shelves, and it's a story. You know, like it's brilliant. It's amazing. We're the only creatures capable of creating stories that we fundamentally believe in, and they're completely unreal. And whether it's past or future, they're just imagined creations that we are constantly making, and we're constantly making up. And so that's how, we learn, and that's how we're taught, and that's how we learn third-person third-person perspective. That's how we grow empathy, is learning stories. And I heard a brilliant chat recently. I was on Shakespeare's birthday a couple of days ago, whatever day it was. Happy birthday, Shakespeare, belatedly. I think it was just a day to celebrate Shakespeare.
I don't think he'll mind.
I don't think it's actually...
Do people know when he was born?
Nah, they don't even know who the guy was. And thanks, Pearl, and also hi
Gina,
back to you,
and Anna.
Gina, and Anna. Thanks very much. Yeah. So, but again, quote. Don't know who said it. Can't remember. But he said something brilliant about the fundamental reason he loves Shakespeare, and I think the fundamental reason I love stories, and we all love stories, is because it gets you to acknowledge differences. And by putting yourself into, as an actor or a performer or as an audience member, by putting yourself into the mind frame of somebody who has a completely different world view to you, is either a villain or a narcissist or completely devoid of some characteristics that you hold very dear, it makes you connect to a difference, and it makes you see the connections and makes you see the similarities. And essentially, we all get sad, we all get happy, we all grieve, and we all mourn the same way, essentially. So it strips back some of the bigger differences and just leaves you a bit raw and more connected to the human condition, I guess. But that's Shakespeare, and that's the big dramas. What I wanted to ask you, following on from your answer there, which was excellent, was why specifically do we as Irish people maybe, but why do we love sad stories so much?
Well, that's a question. I think we've talked about this a little bit before, though, because like I did a lot of research in kind of the different stories that cultures tell in my job over the last kind of several years, and it's really interesting because I think that's one of the key differences is like, is this a culture that likes, you know, sad stories or happy stories? Because different cultures like different types. And like, yeah, Ireland definitely likes the type of story that is sad. We definitely have more stories that are tragic, I think, than happy if you're looking at the mythology and the folktale kind of stuff. Although, personally, I haven't counted. Maybe somebody has. But we tend to like sad stories. Our most popular stories are the very, very tragic ones. And it's funny because you could attribute that to kind of a post-colonial culture, and like the fact that we've had a lot of tragedy and trauma in the cultural kind of memory. But it goes back further than that, of course, because it goes back, you know, into the mythology, which is not anything to do with colonization, although there's a lot of stories of invasions and battles. So yeah, I don't know is the answer to that, why we are so into sad stories, but it's definitely a feature of Irish culture and Irish life. And it's something that I think is broadly kind of healthy. I think a lot of the Western world is very averse to discomfort and death and anything that touches on that. And so they don't tend to tell stories as much that are painful. Whereas there are other cultures, and Ireland is one of them, that really do like to kind of go through the catharsis of tragedy and pain.
Yeah, and I think that's a key thing about stories and whatever about connecting as human beings, or what I was talking about with Shakespeare. I think, like John O'Donoghue, I'm just looking up at on Anam Cara there, and like John O'Donoghue has a beautiful way of kind of seeing the poetry coming out of the land and the sadness in a morning prayer. You know, like the fact that you acknowledge rising with a bit of sadness in your heart, but like the sadness is also kind of peppered with a longing and joy for more, and the fact that love and to be in love with someone is also peppered with sadness, because you know that this beauty will end, you know. And that's kind of like, even though that you could get to the highest point of ecstasy with living, it's kind of, there's a tweak of sadness there, because you know it can't last. So there's this acknowledgement of kind of it being a sad moment as well as a happy moment. I think the duality of happy sad is always kind of there. And I think with sad stories we get a chance to use up some of that sadness that's stored in us, because we get to hear it and we get to go, oh fuck yeah. Like I remember, I still remember coming back from travelling. I was away for a few months and hearing you telling the story of Cuchullin's death, and I was just like, it after kind of 2 or 3 days of being on the road and just motoring and going through just steady, just jum, getting to a place, then hearing a story that just moved me. I felt for the first time in ages, properly. I felt like a human. I felt like an emotional being for the first time in a long time. And I think that's the power of sad stories as well. And that's why we're inclined to like look for that as well, as the happy and as the comedy, and just to feel something. You know?
I think you're right about the power of a sad story, because I think it is those, I often called negative emotions, although I don't think they're inherently negative. It's those emotions that feel more powerful. And especially when we're kind of like hearing them in a group, which is how we usually tell the kind of live stories, you feel very connected to the other people around you as well. And I think that's one of the really special things about, like, you know, storytelling live, which is what we started doing and what we hopefully will be able to do again someday. Is that you don't, like, this is one of the wonderful things about storytelling, is that it is it is a very ancient form of telepathy, because you are putting images and feelings and emotions into people's hearts and heads, and then the entire crowd, all of the people there listening and focusing, kind of sync up, and it becomes this very powerful kind of collective energy. And I hope some of that comes across in the recording of the story in this podcast, because that was some strong energy.
I was going to get to this in a little bit later, but I think you've segued into it perfectly here. And in terms of what we're trying to do with the podcast and create it some way similar to our live performances, where there is a huge connection to the audience and a huge feedback loop going on. You know, you're just running on the energy in the room, and it's co-created and it's beautiful. And it's like singing and chanting when the energy's in the room. It's all a co-created thing, as Gina will surely know. And hi, Mom. Sorry.
Yes, hi, Mer. And actually, Anna sent us a comment about stories from the perspective of the powerful, which I think is very valid. It's kind of that history written by the victors idea, that like often the stories, and actually that's one of the things that I think we're going to talk about a little bit more is finding the stories that are not from the perspective of the powerful, and the stories that are marginal. But we'll get onto that in a second.
Well, let's get back to that, because what I wanted to mention was this form of telepathy. And we've had a number of sibling telepathy moments where live shows will be able to finish each other's sentences, or we'll be able to pick up and drop off. But there's another beautiful symmetry that goes along with live shows, which is the telepathy with the musicians, because they've worked out a structure of a couple of moods, a couple of things that they'll go through, a few different chord changes and everything. But they essentially, if it's a one man musician, then he's basically improvising with us. And if it's a two-man team, they have to improvise kind of together with the storyteller as well. And there's a beautiful kind of, I remember one of our first days, Dara Kenny, he missed a bum note, and a fraction of a second later, I stuttered. And it was just like, you couldn't have been aware of it as a live show, but listen to a recording, he was like, I think I hit a bum note. And then we were on a perfect wave, it was perfectly smooth and all going. And then this really mad thing happened with Diarmuid and Grania part 1 and 2.
Yeah, no,
and I still can't explain it.
That's. I mean, I think it's funny that you say this sibling telepathy is something that sometimes happens, as if this isn't the entire reason Candlelit Tales works. We rely on this so much because it happens
is actually true,
quite reliably, and then
all the time.
It happens all the time.
Yeah, we'd be born.
Oh, we'd be like, we would probably not have, like, either that, or we would have like had to entirely like structure this company in a totally different way. But no, like,
structure.
I mean, how many times have you rung me or I've rung you being like, okay, so we needed to do this thing and it's been on my mind, and you've been like, oh yeah, I've already started it. Or I'll be like, oh yeah, no, I you'll ring me to ask me to look into something, and I'll be like, oh yeah, I was just reading that. Like, this happens all of the time.
Okay, but great example of this is Diarmuid part 1.
Superlative example. Because I think when it happens like that, it's surprising, because it suddenly goes, it's in a different gear then. Like, that was on a different level.
Okay, you explain it now, because I'd say people are a bit lost as to what we're on about if they don't. So just explain it first.
I recorded part 1 of Diarmuid and Grania, and I put it up, and Oisín recorded music for it, and he noticed that it was very, very clearly, like, more clearly than usual, kind of in 4 sections for musical movements. And I think I even changed the tempo. And actually, we're going to try and get Oisín on next week to tell us a little bit more about music. And so that was great. That was cool. That was a thing. Then Aaron recorded Diarmuid and Grania part 2 and uploaded it. And Oisín started sending messages like, how did...
I will say after listening...
Yeah, you listened to it. But he started kind of going, wait, how did you guys do this? What the hell? How did you manage this? It is beat for beat synced up. It is the same tempo. He was able to use the same music. Now, if you were to try and script that, can you even
it'd be a
imagine?
nightmare.
Like, you'd have to, we would
Because
have
what-
to make
like, I
sure that
listened
we
to it
both
and
had
there's-
a metronome.
Yeah. And like I listened back to it, like I was kind of shocked because like even like the 4 sections line up in like the mysterious dark part, the kind of funny uplifting part, and every time I would land a word, the chord would strum out and into a new section where they were running and it was fast paced and big, and it was just like, hang on, what? So it was just uncanny. So Diarmuid Part 1, Diarmuid Gráinne Part 1 and Diarmuid Gráinne Part 2 have the same musical track identically, and he's just plonked them both on top of us, and we don't know how that happened.
And were we to try to actually replicate that, I think we would never do it again. And this is kind of this is one of the things that I think is a continual conversation in Candlelit Tales, or a continual kind of push-pull in Candlelit Tales, because we have a knowledge of the value of rehearsal and getting things really, really polished. And yet we also have a very direct experience of what will arise when we just kind of let it happen spontaneously. And the more people that are involved, the more difficult it is for that that synchronicity to happen.
Sure.
Or the more difficult it is to rely on it happening, I guess.
Yeah. The more we need to, the rehearsals, the more you need to really fine tune it. Whereas like the spontaneity comes out of it.
But we never want to actually erase the possibility of the spontaneity, because that's where the magic really is.
But there's like, for example, the Sugar Club, going back to the story Eachtach, which we're actually talking about, episode 35. The story that we recorded live in February for Women and Warriors with kind of along with Her Story Festival. That's a beautiful example of 3 separate stories, 3 separate musicians, completely different tones, a lot of fluidity between and in around music, a steady groove that Oisin kind of lays down, Audrey with the flourishes with the violin, and Rue kind of jumping in between, being able to play the mando or guitar, and so like there's a nice kind of level of organic improv and spontaneity in those stories, as well as a lot of work we put into it, and that was a beautiful night. And it's been a thing we've done now a few times, the Woman Warriors show. It was our third year doing it, and it was linked up nicely with the Her Story Festival.
I think it was our fourth, because I think we did one in the boys' school. That was me and the boys, me and Rue and Oisin, and another storyteller, Tara, who takes people around Eachtach. I will remember her surname momentarily.
Sure you will.
Sure I will.
But so Her Story shines a light on stories of female characters specifically that have been left out of history, and we obviously take the slant of stories of mythic women that have been kind of erased or forgotten. So we had a lovely night that night, and it was beautiful to share the stage with Mongoose and Farah L, Jade Roxanne, O'Connor, and Aoife Wolf. That was also class. Yes, I remember them all.
Didn't remember them all.
Hey, Tara! Oh no, damn it! I'm the worst. Tara Flynn.
Yeah. We were very, very, very excited that Tara Flynn was able to be the first person up on stage. That was kind of amazing.
And Trassa Kerrigan.
Trassa Kerrigan.
Rose.
That is, thank you, Rue. Trassa Kerrigan was the woman that we did the first Women and Warriors show with. Thank you, Rue. I gave her entirely
Thanks
the
for
wrong
listening
name.
in, Rue. All right, so we have been doing this show, and we've kind of formed a bit of a ritual with it. In ending whatever stories we do, we end it now with the Eachtach story. So why has that become our kind of ritual, Sorry?
Well, I think, like, this is an interesting thing about, so Sandy Dunlop, who I worked with for years on mythology and branding and culture and all this kind of stuff, all this kind of fascinating work, he has a theory about world religions. He's another synthesizing thinker. He did a course in world religions, and he basically said, okay, they're all about a central personality who has a compendium of stories that become rituals, that are told and retold at certain times with certain kind of elements brought in. And that's kind of the basis for them. And it's really interesting that, like, there are some hints that is how Irish mythology also worked, that certain stories were told at certain times of the year. And, like, the one that we started with was the idea that the Táin is told in the winter after dark. And that's kind of the only one that I really have any knowledge of. But the Eachtach story has definitely become a kind of a ritual for us, because, making it part of the Herstory collection, it's so perfectly aligned with the kind of mission of Herstory, which is about finding women who have been erased or forgotten from contemporary culture and history and mythology. And Eachtach, like, it's also just a fascinating story. So it's a story that we only have one source for. Most stories we have multiple sources for. This is a story that was translated by Richard Marsh. It's actually a poem. It's a prose poem that was translated by Richard Marsh. It's in his book Irish King and Hero Tales, and I think I once forgot to credit him for it on stage, but I really try and make an effort to actually credit him for this, because so much of Irish mythology is untranslated. We don't speak or read Old Irish, and so we're very reliant on people like Richard, who actually are going back and translating these stories. He found and he translated the poem about Eachtach. And it's the only one that we have about her.
And so, in case you haven't listened to the story or haven't heard the story, it's Diarmaid's daughter who comes back to avenge the death of her father by the hands of Fianna, essentially, and she brings back the blue bright blade and defeats him, but gets stabbed in the back. And that's essentially the story. We've weeded out and we've kind of looked at a number of different other, like, paddings to put into it, but essentially that's the story. And there's kind of something along with the fact that we keep on ending this very powerful show with this extremely powerful story, because there's something about, like, teaming up with her story, and the fact that we're kind of, we're in a century now where we're really trying to balance out the sexes and trying to sort out misogyny and trying to eradicate, in some degree anyway, the problems that the patriarchy have put on the world, and just shining a light on female stories. I always think it's brilliant to acknowledge, as we do, Richard Marsh, the men involved in it. I love being part of the telling of it, because it's not women talking about women's problems then, and that which kind of becomes an exclusive thing where men can get turned away from, but it can be this, like, what I always say is, like, the stories get better exponentially for all of the characters, men and female, when all of the characters are fully rounded and more interesting and fully depicted. So fully in understanding the story of Eachtach just enhances our understanding of the Fianna and Fionn and kind of what happened. And I guess there's a huge thing that happens at the end of the story where you always call for Eachtach's name to be shouted out. And yeah, I guess I'm always, like, this is the chance for you to word it, is for you to tell us why it is that you demand a room full of people to shout out the name Eachtach.
Yeah, I actually think that this one I got them to shout awake.
Oh yeah.
Because I did awake this time, because Eachtach is a little bit difficult if you're not familiar with it. I'm also just very quickly upgrading our Zoom account because it's going to cut us off otherwise. It's fine.
Oh, really? You're doing it.
Yeah, I had meant to do that. I had very much meant to do that. So, whoops. Sorry about that, folks. Going to do this now.
Again, I suppose while you're doing that, I'll waffle on a little bit, because I guess the story that we managed to put together and have done for a number of years, and the reason we put Eachtach at the very last story is it somehow seems to symbolise the end of the Fianna. Fianna is defeated, and the rightful ruler doesn't take her place. And then the downfall of the Fianna seems to happen. And it seems, putting 2 and 3 together, I don't know, or joining a few dots that haven't really been written down or understood what happened to the Fianna. We like the understanding that without the rightful ruler there, they kind of disintegrated. And she, Eachtach, defeated Fianna and should have been the next leader, and yet was then forgotten. And I guess we were talking about rituals earlier on, and the proper ritual wasn't allowed out, and the proper ritual of seeing the next rightful ruler wasn't allowed to happen. And there's something really sacred about certain rituals, like storytelling, connecting, and even the power that the brilliance we have of telling sad stories and connecting to it as Irish people. We're amazing at funerals, and we're amazing at the ritual of grieving, and we seem to do that better than any other country. And yet my heart goes out so much to people right now that are having to bury loved ones, not necessarily that have died of COVID, but anyone. My housemate's friend lost a mother last week, and I just really feel for people that are going through any big trauma like that right now, because they're not getting the chance to grieve as we usually do, because we do that ritual of grieving so well, and we do that ritual of getting together and sharing the grief so well, and now we can't do that. And there's something kind of stuck in that, and there's something maybe that was stuck in this story, and it was something that was not fully let happen, that we can see the metaphor of that happening, whereas not allowing the rituals to take place kind of has not a great effect, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Do you want to jump in on that?
I agree. I am still trying to bloody do this Zoom thing.
Oh, no.
I know.
We have 5 minutes remaining, so...
We have 5 minutes remaining. Oh God. I'm sorry, guys. This is gonna be fine.
And that was incredible. I think Zamus and Ziara was talking about women warriors. Thanks for commenting on the live Facebook feed. Sorry for the interruption in our chat at the moment, guys, but we'll be curious to hear from you guys as to how do you think a story just kind of jumped to mind of like I didn't understand that my dog had died for like 2 years. I kept on going home and like seeing, like thinking Oscar was there, and like for 2 years it was like, and I think it was because we didn't have a ceremony, we didn't have a thing to come together and just like let it go, and we didn't actually acknowledge it together. I know we all had phone conversations with mum and dad, and we all kind of grieved in our own way, but it wasn't as cathartic and it wasn't as connected because we weren't together and we weren't doing that ritual of mourning, which I think is so important. And I think the more you look at whether they're Irish stories or not, or any global stories, the idea of coming together to share in emotion, whether it's joy in celebration for birth and renewal, or whether it's for mourning and having a trauma, the oldest communities got together to share those, and there's something really beautiful about being able to express that, and through story you get to do that. And certainly I think this Eachtach story gets everybody together in this hugely fueled desire for revenge that Eachtach seems justified to get and go along with it, up to the point where you realise that that's been taken away from her. And there's this absolute denial. It's just like, no. Like, people have shouted out, like, no, what? That she gets stabbed in the back, because it's not the next logical step. It's not the thing that you're expecting. And yet it signifies such a misstep, and it signifies and represents that kind of cultural misstep and where we are maybe without following through with our, I don't know, connections and our rituals and our things that we should be doing together as communities, and that we can't do right now, which is super tough. I'm going to let you chime in any time that you want. Pearl, you can just exit and rejoin Zoom, worst case, and you'll have another 40 minutes. Will that interrupt the Facebook Live?
I think we might need to do that, guys. We're just going to need to interrupt the Facebook Live. I apologise about this.
Anna, yes, there's funerals. I do funerals so well. I hear you, Aaron. Thank you, Anna, for hearing me. I appreciate it. And Pearl, I think we're going to have to log off and log back on again.
Yeah, we're going to do that, because this is just not working. It's fine.
Fan no maid,
lads. We'll be back to you in 1 second.
Curl of Mela.
Okay, that should have gone through to Aaron's email, and he should be joining us very, very shortly, because my WhatsApp was taking a few minutes to connect. So, yep, just me sitting here. How's it going, lads? Sorry about that. These are the kinds of things that we were trying to get sorted before we started today because of anyway, but it didn't quite work. So, Fianna, I'm just going to talk to you until Aaron's able to join, because it'll take a couple of seconds. Was Queen Maeve the only... Let me just read this. Slow computer. Come on, lads. Queen Maeve was the only female leader. Was this done for a reason? Queen Maeve was not the only female leader. Queen Maeve's mother was the Queen of Connacht in some sources. So she's maybe the only one that is remembered. But yeah, I mean, same reason as all other women are forgotten and erased from history and contemporary life.
I'm back.
Yeah, switching to gallery view. And we are back up, guys. Sorry about that. Many apologies. I didn't realise there was a time restriction on the two-person meeting, but now we know.
Now we know. All right, well, I tell you what. Why don't you give us your take on ritual, Eachtach, trauma, funerals, and the reason we tell stories. Go! I mean, I had to talk for ages there.
I know, it was really, really hard because I was trying to, like...
it's supposed to be a conversation.
This is supposed to be a conversation.
Me interviewing you.
That's why I'm reading the comments. Pearl says, I'm a Kiwi, ancestrally mostly Irish and also part Maori. The funerals are very similar. I had a shock when I realised other cultures didn't do a kind of wake or tangi in the same way.
You don't grieve? Like, what? Like, that's great to know. I want to go to New Zealand and experience that.
I don't think it is unique to Ireland by any means. I think...
Oh, no, I don't mean that. I mean, what's mind-blowing is that some cultures don't.
I agree. I think it's weird that some cultures don't do it. And I think, yeah, in Ireland, like, we are very aware of the kind of importance of funerals, and it is a huge, huge hardship to people now, you know, during the COVID crisis, that funerals are not allowed. I think in a lot of parts of the country, it's 10 people, which usually isn't going to cover even immediate family. And then in Northern Ireland, a friend of mine in Belfast lost her mum recently, and they can't even go into the crematorium, not even the immediate family, which is absolutely awful, because it removes that moment of being able to have that ritual of grief and closure. And there's also something about, like, in Ireland, the idea of having a proper send-off and having a proper, outpouring, that's really, really important. Like, if you go to any funeral in a small town, the entire town will turn up. And if you go to any funeral of like somebody who's touched a lot of lives, everybody who has been touched by that person will show up. Whereas, in other cultures, it's seen as something of like an imposition to go along to a funeral where you don't know the person very, very well, almost as if you're taking away from the grief of the people who are there. Whereas I think in this country we see it as a very much a supportive act and a thing. Tony has also been here for a while. Hi, Tony. That is our dad.
I mean, it's an amazing thing to think that people don't get to grieve right now properly, and we're going to go through a long time of not properly being able to grieve, and we're going to lose a lot of people. And I think we're acknowledging that in whatever disconnected way we can imagine it. And it's a sad thing, and I know people are trying to get outside and not get cabin fever, and kind of there's a level of fear there as well. But I think it's something that's so good about not Irish stories, just sad stories get that cathartic response that you need to have, that you need to be able to be moved. I listened to Glenn Hansard's birthday last week. He did a live stream of his birthday, and for the first song he gave it socks, and I just bawled crying. I don't know why. I just forgot that I had emotions going on.
Yeah, but I think that's a really key thing about this social distancing that we're doing, and like, this is not the first time in human history that people have had to quarantine because of a pandemic. But we are very much able to alleviate some of it through technology and connecting through technology, but not all of it. There's a lot of it that we're not able to miss, or that we're not able to kind of replicate, and that's hard, because I think it's really showing us how incredibly socially constructed we are as animals. Like, we need other humans around us. We are herd creatures. And like, I'm someone who, I'm very happy in my own company. I'm very happy in my own space, and I'm missing it now. Like, I'm starting to feel it in the last couple of weeks, whereas in the first couple of weeks I kind of wasn't. But like, that's just me. But I'm really starting to feel it now. So I think everybody is starting to feel that. Yeah, that loss of just being in a group and being able to be in a crowd, and have those kinds of collective experiences, whether it's at a storytelling show or at a concert or at a place of worship, or wherever you get that in your normal life. We're all without that at the moment, and I think it's really important to acknowledge. On the Eachtach story, just to kind of bring it back to her.
I was going to literally ask you about Eachtach. Yeah.
Sibling Telepathy, see?
Ding!
Ding. On the Eachtach story, and on that particular way that we found of telling it, that was very much a choice that we made, taking that prose poem and kind of going, hang on, there are some interesting parallels here between Eachtach's story and Fionn McCool's early story, because Fionn McCool's father is killed by Gull MacMorna. Ull is killed by Gull, and Gull takes over leadership of the Fianna, and then Fionn comes back as a young man and confronts Gull MacMorna. And I remember hearing a retelling by I think an American guy who has an Irish Myths podcast. When we actually get this out as a podcast, I'll find it and I'll link it in the show notes. But he talked about how he told the story, and then he talked about how he was really expecting Fionn to kill Gull MacMorna. He was really, because according to all the myths that he had ever read and heard, that's where that story was going. It was supposed to be a revenge story. where Fionn McCool goes and like trains and becomes this like total badass, confronts Gull McMorna, kills the dragon that he's not able to kill, saves everybody, and then they finally meet, and he was fully expecting it to be a fight, and that's not what happens in the story. Instead, Fionn says to Gull, we can fight if you want, or you can follow me. And Gull McMorna becomes one of the captains of the Fianna under him. And so that was an interesting thing with the Eachtach story as well, was that now I think she's a lot more in the rage than Fianna is, but she also loses a father to the captain of the Fianna. And she goes away and she trains and she becomes this total badass. She comes back to Ireland and she beats him. She's the only person to beat Fionn McCool in single combat. She bests him. She breaks him. She knocks him down to where he's a year recovering from the wounds she gives him. And that was where I was kind of thinking, well, hang on. She's then stabbed before she can deliver the death blow. Was she going to deliver the death blow?
Yeah, that's the thing.
Does she have a moment there where she has a choice? Is there, and like, that was where I found it really interesting, where I was like, well, what if we actually give her that moment, if we extend that moment slightly and say, she has a choice now where she can kill him or not kill him. And either way, she has kind of won the captaincy of the Fianna. Because although it passes in different ways, this is one of the ways that it passes. Gull became captain of the Fianna after killing the leader of the Fianna. Eachtach is in a position where she can become captain of the Fianna after killing captain of the Fianna. And this is also one of those times where I'm like, and I have to say it every time I tell a Fianna story, there are women in the Fianna. A third of the Fianna are women. It fucking bears repeating. Because if you don't repeat it, we all go into that conditioned the men of the Fianna. No, they're the Fianna because a third of them are women. And Eachtach is in a position where she can become the next captain. And I do think like it links into the beginning of the end of the Fianna because they don't renew. They don't, that's the essence of Cuilte's Lament, which is the story which is the poem that Richard translates. It's actually a story told by Cuilte McGronan many, many, many years later, and he's lamenting the fact that there are no great warriors anymore. And some of the people that he mentions are the children of Diarmid and Grania, Eachtach and her 3 brothers. And that's part of, like, he's actually mourning her. He's mourning the fact that she died.
Yeah.
And I think there's something there that's really powerful. And also I think like the first time, I remember Maria saying this, our mum, when she was in the crowd, at one of the Women and Warriors ones, it was the one we did in Whelan's on the 6th of January, which I think was last year or the year before.
2019.
Yeah, and it was. She pointed out actually, people didn't say no when Eachtach was stabbed. It was there were mostly women in that crowd, as there often are at our shows.
Christmas.
It was Nullig na Man.
Women's Little Christmas as well, so you know.
Yeah, it was Nullig na Man, but it was also, I think that was like, because it was her story, because it was Women and Warriors, because it was a women centric show. A lot of women showed up, and there wasn't a like no. There was a yeah.
Typical.
That's what happens. That's actually what women are used to. You get to the moment of your triumph, and then some nameless fuckhead stabs you in the back, and it goes nowhere.
But there is something very interesting what you said about Eachtach being stuck in the rage, and I think that's something that we've all experienced in terms of like some of my exes, who I love dearly, but being stuck in the rage cycle of, let's not mention names, sorry, but being stuck in the rage element of feminism, and that only brings back more, or doesn't actually move the discussion further, because it gets stuck in a hate and it makes men evil and vindictive, and you go nowhere, and you just get caught in a cycle. And then men turn a blind eye to it and say, no, that's feminism and can't look at that. And
it's
then you don't actually get to...
Scary. Yeah. And actually, that's something that I had a conversation with Melanie Lynch, who's the founder of Her Story, about that. You know, in the lead up to this show as well, which was, you know, we were talking about rage and the need to move beyond it, and the need to, in her words, transmute it, and actually take it to something else, because there's a lot of energy in anger. And I think that's also why it can kind of become a little bit addictive, especially when it feels like righteous, like you're in the right. You can kind of start chewing over it because you get this kind of boost out of it and it starts to feel good. But if we're not able to actually transmute it into something more positive and something more inclusive, then yeah, we do get stuck in it, and it becomes alienating. Because as good as it feels, unless you're able to take that energy and do something different with it, it doesn't go anywhere. And I think that's a really interesting thing about the Eachtach story. You know, if we take that reading that she's not able to move beyond the rage, maybe that's why the Fianna doesn't renew as well. Maybe it's because it's both. You know, and maybe an Eachtach, like an angry Eachtach at the head of the Fianna, would not have been a good leader for them.
And so your man comes up and stabs her in the back. And maybe that's the metaphor of, you know, you can't lead with just rage to level it all out. You can't just seek revenge and demand equality or demand fairness then afterwards, because you're reading with the wrong foot. You know, Gandhi knew it. Maybe Eachtach didn't.
Yeah. And like maybe she did, and that's why I like the ambiguity of leaving her in that moment where, and it's a truth of the story as well, that we don't know what her next action would have been.
Yeah.
So we leave it open to the possibility that maybe she was going to move beyond her anger, and that choice is taken from her, because that's the action of Ludhorn. That's what he does. He takes the choice away from her, and that's why it's a tragedy. And it has become, it's become our ritual. It's become our Her Story ritual to tell Eachtach and to get everyone to shout. Because I think that, like, that's something that I always think is nice to bring that ritual and make it more inclusive, is to get everyone to shout together. It's become a part of our bigger live shows.
Absolutely. It started in the festivals when we got people to shout. And I think it started with the Bulls for the first time, but we were recognised that just a big roar together just gets us to go.
The first time we did it actually was in Arcadian Fields. It was you weren't at that one. It was myself and Aoife Kavanagh telling the stories.
Correction, the very first time was actually in Grange Gorman, when it took me by surprise when me, Rue and Dara and Stephanie Dufresne was there as well, and I told the Bulls, and I went, and he roared, because he went over and roared, and it was just a big group of people watching in a giant, before their student accommodation, it's just big giant shed that was some form of warehouse, and just this roar came back to us, and he roared again, and he roared again. It was amazing, and it was all full of performers and acrobats and jugglers and people who were just super into it, so that helped.
Yeah, well, it was after that, that my first experience of it was in Arcadian Field, and after that we made it a deliberate part of our live shows when they were big enough, and we kind of tell people we are going to ask you to shout, because usually they need priming. And this was the thing that we got them to shout in the Sugar Club, was Awake. And if we woke up an angry mother goddess, oops.
That's not hopefully.
I'm not drawing any parallels there. Listen, sometimes there's a lot of
COVID was already a thing. It was already a thing. Let's not even mention it. I didn't say it.
No.
Let's not even say the word.
Let's mention it. I'm just saying there's a lot of healing that's happening on a planetary level while we are all suffering through this.
Camille, I want to read out a message that was sent to us last night. I only saw it just before we started this. It was just really, really lovely. Thank you, Paul O'Mani, or P. O'Mani. You guys are doing a wonderful job of reigniting the stories from my school days. I'm enthralled and transported by them. Please keep up the good work in this difficult time and know that you are admired and cherished by many of us out there. Smiley face. So that was a really, really beautiful message from P. O'Mani and Antonetta. And I just want to say thank you so much for all the people that have joined our Patreon page. Oh, Sorika, you want to say something? All right, I'm live. Oh, God. Sorry about the confusion with all this, guys. There was a bit of a delay with Sorika's computer, and it just crapped out. I don't know why. I'm now live again, just going to finish off this post-show podcast, which has been a bit of a mare. Sorry about that. And sorry for having to start because of the Zoom thing. We're just going to put this up. Don't worry, the whole podcast will be edited and we'll have it up as a post-show podcast to our regular viewers. If you have any questions, let us know. Thank you so much for all of the Patreon support that we're getting at the moment. I have a whole list of names that I want to just give a shout out to and thank very much. Got a lovely message from Antoinette and P. O'Mani recently. Thanks for reaching out, guys. And Kira DeSanti sent us a lovely message as well about how she's been really ingratiated by the Irish spirit and how she loved this Kesser story, making her feel very Irish from abroad. P. O'Mani sent us a lovely message as well last night. Thank you, Antoinette. Thank you, George. Thank you, Gordon, Claire, Kira DeSanti, Laura, Sarah, Nicole, Darren, Andrew, Adrian, Hannah, Darren, Jake, Keith, Liam, Alex, Lucy, and Anne-Marie, all for joining the Patreon this month. That's all in April. And some people are just giving us a small amount. Grawmore, great chat. Rue, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Sorry that it was cut off. Sorry Sorek isn't here right now. But just to bring it to a nice close, I wanted to thank everybody who's been supporting us in this difficult time. We don't know when we're going to get to do a live story again. And but knowing that these stories are received and heard and listened to, thank you, Anna. Great chat with you as well. Delighted you were listening. And sorry that Sorek isn't here to wish you goodbye. Her computer crapped out. And I'm just glad that we're able to tell these stories and they're received and that you're listening and that it's enjoyable for you all. So thank you. And last month we got a good thank you from Ryan O'Connor, Susan, Jack Cody, Elizabeth, Tara Clark, you legend, Kierton, Deirdre and Niamh. Thank you so much last month as well. We forgot to give you a shout out until now. Thank you very much. Slán, and hope you're keeping safe, washing your hands and coughing into your elbow. Alright guys, we'll be back with another podcast on Wednesday, and that's my one. I gotta get recording that right now, and we'll be chatting again next Saturday at 1 o'clock. So until then, go on more and good luck.